When ancient marks meet alien steel, the Colorado mountains held their breath as Jake Harrison climbed the rocky slope, his boots crunching against loose stone and patches of early morning frost. At 28, the former Marine moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to read danger in every shadow. His backpack held 3 days' worth of supplies for what was supposed to be a simple solo hike. A chance to clear his head after another sleepless night, filled with dreams of stars and symbols he couldn't understand. The tattoos covering his arms and back itched beneath his flannel shirt, as they had for the past 3 years. The intricate patterns weren't something he'd chosen. They had simply appeared after his last mission in Afghanistan, materializing on his skin during the 2 weeks he'd spent in a coma following an IED blast that should have killed him. The doctors had no explanation. The military psychologists had filed their reports and processed his medical discharge. Jake had learned to live with the mystery, even as the strange markings seemed to pulse with a life of their own during thunderstorms or moments of intense emotion. Now, as he crested a ridge that should have offered a view of pristine wilderness, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. A massive crater scarred the mountainside below, its edges still smoking despite the fact that no meteor shower had been reported in weeks. At the center of the devastation lay something that made his breath catch. In his throat, it wasn't a meteorite. The object was clearly artificial, its surface gleaming with an opalescent sheen that shifted between silver and deep blue as clouds passed overhead. The craft was elegant in a way that human engineering had never achieved, its hull flowing in, curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built. Crystalline protrusions jutted from various points along its surface, some cracked from impact but others still intact and pulsing with faint inner light. Jake's tattoos began to warm against his skin. He pulled up his sleeve and watched in fascination, as the intricate patterns etched into his forearms started to glow with the same blue light emanating from the crashed vessel. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was impossible to ignore. Something deep in his chest told him to approach, a compulsion that felt as natural as breathing. The descent into the crater was treacherous, loose rock and debris making every step uncertain. As Jake drew closer to the ship, his tattoos grew brighter, the patterns seeming to shift and move beneath his skin. By the time he reached the vessel's hull, his entire body was outlined in soft blue radiance, visible even in the morning sunlight. The ship's surface was warm to the touch, and Jake could feel a subtle vibration running through the metal. He walked slowly around the perimeter, looking for any sign of an entrance or hatch. The craft was roughly the size of a small airplane, but its seamless construction offered no obvious way inside. As he completed his circuit, placing his palm against what seemed to be a particularly smooth section of hull, the ship responded. A sound like singing crystal filled the air, and Jake stepped back as a section of the hull began to dissolve, revealing an entrance just large enough for a person to enter. Soft light spilled from within, and Jake caught a scent that reminded him of rain on desert stone mixed with something floral and completely alien. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the morning air. There was no response, but the ship's lights pulsed in what seemed like a welcoming pattern. Jake's tattoos flared brighter, and he felt that same inexplicable compulsion drawing him forward. The interior of the ship was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls curved smoothly overhead, their surface embedded with veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The floor beneath his feet felt solid, but somehow organic, as if he were walking inside a living thing rather than a machine. Banks of what appeared to be controls lined the walls, their surfaces covered in symbols that looked disturbingly familiar. Jake pulled off his shirt and stared at his reflection in a polished surface. The tattoos covering his torso were identical. Too many of the symbols surrounding him. As he watched, the markings on his skin began to pulse in synchronization with the ship's lights, creating a feedback loop that made the entire vessel hum with increasing energy. Identification confirmed, a voice said, speaking in perfect English with no accent Jake could identify. The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted directly into his mind rather than through his ears. "Welcome, Keeper. You have been away from us for far too long." Jake spun around, looking for the source of the voice. "Who's there? Where are you?" "I am the ship's consciousness, what you might call an artificial intelligence. I have been waiting for one of your kind to find me. Your genetic markers identify you as a descendant of the third-wave colonists who departed Earth 4,000 years ago." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Humans haven't had space travel for 4,000 years. Hell, we've barely made it to the moon and back. The history your people remember is incomplete," the ship's voice replied, patient and somehow sad. "Long before your current civilization developed, humanity reached for the stars. They built ships like me and seeded colonies throughout this arm of the galaxy. When the great catastrophe struck Earth, most of these colonies were cut off from their homeworld. Over time, they developed their own cultures, their own technologies. Some thrived, others fell. A few, like your ancestors, found their way back to Earth and integrated with the populations that remained." Jake sank into what appeared to be a chair, though it molded itself to his body in a way that suggested it was more than simple furniture. "The tattoos are genetic markers encoded in your DNA and triggered by proximity to our technology. They identify you as one of the keepers, those chosen to maintain the connection between Earth and its scattered children. Your markings are not random decorations. They are a star map, a communication protocol, and a key to technologies your current civilization has forgotten." The ship's main display activated, showing a three-dimensional representation of local space. Hundreds of star systems were highlighted, connected by flowing lines of light that pulsed in patterns Jake somehow understood. His tattoos were a living representation of this network, each symbol corresponding to a different node in humanity's forgotten galactic community. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer would change everything. "Because the network is in danger. A hostile civilization known as the Devourers has been systematically destroying human colonies throughout the Outer Rim. They believe humanity is weak, scattered, and defenseless. They are correct about the first 2 points, but gravely mistaken about the third." New images appeared on the display, showing massive ships with aggressive, angular designs, moving through space toward familiar constellations. Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized the trajectory. They were headed for Earth. "The Devourers have been observing your planet for decades," the ship continued. "They see a world divided against itself, lacking the technology for effective space defense. They do not know about the ancient safeguards that were put in place by your ancestors, defensive networks that have been dormant for millennia, waiting for a keeper to activate them." Jake stood up, his tattoos now blazing with light that filled the ship's interior. "You're saying I'm supposed to activate these defenses? I'm just one person. I don't know anything about alien technology or galactic politics. You know more than you realize. The knowledge is encoded in your genetic structure, waiting to be awakened. But activation requires a choice, Keeper. Once you begin this path, there is no returning to your former life. You will become Earth's first official representative to the galactic community in 4,000 years. The ship's sensors suddenly activated, and new displays showed military vehicles approaching the crater. Jake counted at least a dozen helicopters and what looked like a full battalion of soldiers, setting up a perimeter around the impact site. "It appears your government has taken notice of our meeting," the ship observed. "They have been monitoring similar incidents worldwide. There are others like you, Jake Harrison, other keepers whose genetic markers have been triggered by the approach of our ancient enemies." Jake moved to what appeared to be a viewport and watched as soldiers rappelled from helicopters, their movements precise and coordinated. Among them, he spotted a figure in dress uniform, a woman with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the ship identified. "She has been tracking genetic anomalies like yours for the past 5 years. Her own DNA shows traces of colonial heritage, though not strong enough to activate the Keeper protocols." The implications hit Jake like a tsunami. His government had been aware of people like him, probably studying them, maybe even experimenting on them. The thought made his stomach turn, but it also explained the strange dreams, the sense of being watched, the feeling that his discharge from the military had been less than honest. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The Devourers will arrive in approximately 72 hours. Without active defenses, Earth's population will be reduced to a manageable workforce within weeks. The survivors will be relocated to serve the Devour Empire. Your planet will be stripped of resources and abandoned." Jake looked at his hands, watching the tattoos pulse with increasing intensity. The symbols were beautiful in their complexity, each one a piece of a vast puzzle that his ancestors had encoded in there. Very genetic structure. He thought about his younger sister attending college in Denver, about his parents living their quiet retirement in Kansas, about the 7 billion people on Earth who had no idea their world was about to change forever. "If I agree to this, what exactly am I agreeing to?" "To become humanity's bridge to the stars, to awaken defenses that have slept for millennia, to stand as Earth's representative before a galactic community that has wondered for centuries if their human cousins still remembered the stars." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, and Jake could hear orders being shouted from the crater's rim. Soon, Colonel Mitchell and her soldiers would reach the ship. He had minutes, maybe less, before his choice would be made for him. Jake pressed his palm against the ship's control interface, feeling the warm metal respond to his touch. His tattoos flared with brilliant light, and suddenly he could see the network as it truly was. Hundreds of human colonies scattered across the galaxy, defense satellites hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae, ancient warships waiting in the void between stars. All of it connected, all of it waiting for a single command from someone with the genetic authority to issue it. "I accept," he said quietly, and the ship around him came alive with purpose. Human legacy ignites the stars. Moment Jake spoke his acceptance. The ship's systems activated with a harmony that resonated through his bones. His tattoos blazed with light so intense that it was visible through the ship's hull, causing the approaching soldiers to halt their advance and shield their eyes. Colonel Sarah Mitchell's voice crackled through radio communications as she ordered her troops to hold position and await further orders. "Keeper protocols activated," the ship announced, its voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from Jake's own throat, establishing connection with the primary network. Jake felt a rush of sensation as information flowed through him. carried by the genetic markers that had been dormant in his cells for his entire life. Star charts blossomed in his mind, showing not just the locations of human colonies, but their current status, their technologies, their populations. Many of the signals were strong and clear, indicating thriving civilizations that had advanced far beyond Earth's current capabilities. Others were weak or silent, suggesting worlds that had fallen to the devourers or other catastrophes. "The network is more extensive than I imagined," Jake said, his voice carrying new authority. "There are at least 300 active colonies, and they're all connected." "Your ancestors were thorough in their preparations," the ship agreed. They knew that isolation would be humanity's greatest weakness. The network ensures that no human world stands alone. Through the ship's sensors, Jake watched as Colonel Mitchell finally reached the crater's edge. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 40s, with prematurely grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform bore decorations that suggested extensive combat experience, but her expression was one of scientific curiosity rather than military aggression. "This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Space Command," she announced through an external speaker. "I'm requesting communication with the occupants of the unidentified vessel." Jake looked at the ship's communication controls, understanding their function as if he'd been trained on them his entire life. "Should I respond?" "The choice is yours, Keeper. Colonel Mitchell has been tracking genetic anomalies like yours for several years. Her research has been instrumental in preparing Earth's governments for the possibility of contact with advanced civilizations. She is not an enemy, but her loyalties are to institutions that may not understand the scope of what we face." Jake activated the external communications. "Colonel Mitchell, this is Jake Harrison. I'm a United States citizen, and I'm currently inside this vessel by choice. I need to speak with you, but it has to be face to face." There was a pause before Mitchell responded. "Mr. Harrison, are you under duress? Are you being held against your will?" "No, ma'am. But I have information that's going to change everything you thought you knew about humanity's place in the universe." Jake felt the ship's systems shift around him, creating what appeared to be an airlock near the entrance he'd used earlier. "I'm going to meet with her," he told the ship. "Keep monitoring the network. If the Devourers arrive early, wake me immediately." "Understood. Keeper, I will maintain readiness for immediate activation of defensive protocols." Jake stepped through the airlock, feeling the cool mountain air hit his skin. His tattoos were still glowing, though less intensely than before, creating patterns of light that were clearly visible to the soldiers positioned around the crater. He climbed slowly toward the rim, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Colonel." Mitchell met him halfway, accompanied by 2 soldiers, but showing no sign of aggression. Up close, Jake could see that her eyes held a mixture of scientific fascination and deep concern. "Mr. Harrison," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell. I've been hoping to meet someone like you for a very long time." Jake shook her hand, noting that her grip was firm and confident. "Someone like me, someone with active genetic markers. We've been tracking individuals with unusual DNA patterns for years, but you're the first one we've found who shows clear signs of activation." "How much do you know?" Jake asked, studying her face. "More than you might expect. We've recovered fragments of advanced technology from various crash sites over the past decade. Analysis suggests that some of it is human in origin, but far more advanced than anything our current civilization has produced. We've theorized that there might be human populations elsewhere in the galaxy, possibly descendants of some kind of ancient space program. Jake felt a surge of respect for the woman's intelligence and preparation. Your theories are more accurate. Then you know, the ship down there, it's been waiting for someone like me to find it. And what it's told me. Colonel, we're not alone in the universe, but we're also not as alone as we thought. Mitchell's expression grew serious. I need to hear everything. My team has been preparing for first contact scenarios for years. But if you're telling me that contact has already been made, it's more complicated than that, Jake interrupted. We need to get down to the ship. What I'm about to show you will require proof that words alone can't provide. The descent into the crater was accomplished with military efficiency. Mitchell's soldiers established a secure perimeter while she and Jake approached the ship together. As they drew closer, Jake's tattoos began to glow more brightly, and the ship's systems responded with a welcoming pulse of light. Jesus, Mitchell whispered, staring at the intricate patterns covering Jake's exposed arms. They're not just tattoos, are they? They're a genetic expression triggered by proximity to technology left by our ancestors. Jake explained as they entered the ship. 4,000 years ago, humans reached the stars. They built ships like this one and established colonies throughout the galaxy. When something catastrophic happened on Earth, most of these colonies were cut off from their homeworld. The ship's interior lit up as they entered, and Mitchell's training kept her expression neutral despite the obvious amazement in her eyes. The technology level is incredible. This is decades ahead of anything we've developed. It's actually human technology, Jake said, moving to the main control interface. Watch this. He placed his palm against the control surface, and the ship's main display activated. The three-dimensional star map appeared, showing the network of human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Mitchell stared at the display, her scientific mind clearly working to process the implications. There are hundreds of them, she said. Quietly, all these points of light, they're human colonies. Active ones, Jake confirmed, and they're all connected through a network that's been dormant for millennia. The people who built this system knew that isolation would be humanity's greatest weakness. They created a fail-safe that would allow the scattered colonies to coordinate. Their defenses, if they were ever threatened. Threatened by what? Jake's expression grew grim. By species like the Devourers. They're a hostile civilization that's been systematically destroying human colonies throughout the Outer Rim. They're coming for Earth, Colonel. They'll be here in less than 3 days. Mitchell's military training kicked in immediately. What kind of threat are we talking about? Fleet size, capabilities, probable targets. The ship's display shifted, showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Mitchell's face paled as she took in the scale of the invasion force. Mother of God, there are hundreds of ships. They believe Earth is defenseless, Jake said. They're wrong. The network my ancestors built includes defensive systems that have been hidden throughout the solar system for thousands of years. But they need to be activated, and that requires someone with the genetic authority to do it. You, Mitchell said, understanding dawning in her eyes, me, and others like me. There are more keepers, Colonel. Your research has probably identified some of them already. We need to find them and bring them together. The defensive network requires multiple authorization codes to activate fully. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, processing the enormity of what she was being told. If what you're saying is true, then we're looking at a complete paradigm shift. Not just first contact, but reunion with human civilizations that have been separated from Earth for millennia. That's exactly what we're looking at, Jake confirmed. But first, we need to survive the next 72 hours. The ship's systems suddenly activated with urgent energy. "Keeper," the AI announced, "I'm detecting movement in the outer solar system. The Devourer fleet has arrived ahead of schedule." Jake felt his tattoos flare with brilliant light as the ship's sensors focused on the approaching threat. Through the display, he could see massive vessels emerging from hyperspace near Neptune's orbit, their angular designs radiating malevolent purpose. "They're early," Mitchell said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "By almost 2 days," Jake confirmed. "They must have detected the network activation when I agreed to become a keeper." The ship's AI continued its report. "Devourer fleet. Composition 237 vessels, ranging from destroyer class to city ship size. Estimated time to Earth orbit, 18 hours. Mitchell activated her communication equipment. "This is Colonel Mitchell to Strategic Command. We have a confirmed extraterrestrial threat approaching Earth. Recommend immediate implementation of Defense Condition 1. Jake watched as the Devourer fleet began to organize itself into attack formations. "Colonel, your military won't be able to stop them with conventional weapons, but I can activate the ancient defenses. The question is whether you trust me enough to let me do it." Mitchell looked at him steadily. "What do you need? Authorization to access the other keepers, your research files on genetic anomalies, and a leap of faith that sometimes the impossible is just the truth waiting to be discovered." Jake placed both hands on the ship's control interface, feeling the ancient systems respond to his genetic signature. His tattoos blazed with light that filled the ship's interior, and suddenly he could sense the other keepers scattered across the globe. A woman in Tokyo whose dreams had been filled with star songs. A man in snow polo who had been drawing spiral patterns since childhood. A teenager in Lagos whose skin had begun to show faint markings after a fever 3 weeks ago. "I can feel them," Jake said, his voice carrying new harmonics. "The other keepers, they're waking up." The ship's communication systems expanded, reaching out across the globe to connect with the awakening keepers. Jake felt their minds touch his, sharing memories and knowledge that had been encoded in their genetic structure for generations. Together, they formed a network of consciousness that spanned the planet. "Ancient defensive systems activating," the ship announced. Hidden installations coming online throughout the solar system. Through the ship's sensors, Jake watched as asteroid fields began to shimmer with energy, revealing massive defense platforms that had been camouflaged for millennia. Dormant satellites in Earth's orbit suddenly blazed to life, their advanced weaponry powering up with efficiency that spoke of technology far beyond current human capabilities. "My God," Mitchell whispered, staring at the display. "They're everywhere. The entire solar system is a fortress." "Our ancestors were very thorough," Jake said, feeling the power of the network flowing through him. "They knew that Earth would be vulnerable after the great catastrophe. They made sure it would never be defenseless again." The first Devourer scout ships entered the outer defense perimeter, and Jake felt, rather than saw, the ancient weapons systems engage. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from hidden platforms, striking the alien vessels with precision that spoke of artificial intelligence far advanced beyond anything humanity had yet developed. "The network is fully active," Jake reported, his tattoos now so bright they cast shadows on the ship's walls. "All colonies are responding. The Devourers are about to learn that humanity is not the scattered, defenseless species they believed us to be." Through the galactic network, Jake could sense the response from the human colonies. Ships that had been hidden for generations began to emerge from concealment, their crews awakening from suspended animation chambers. Technologies that had been waiting for authorization suddenly came online, ready to defend not just individual worlds, but the entire human presence in the galaxy. Keeper, the ship's AI announced, I'm receiving a transmission from the lead Devourer vessel. They're requesting communication. Jake looked at Colonel Mitchell, who nodded grimly. Let's hear what they have to say. The ship's display shifted, showing the bridge of the lead Devourer vessel. The aliens were humanoid, but clearly not human, with elongated skulls and eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and cruel. Their leader, identifiable by more elaborate armor and bearing, spoke in a language that the ship's systems translated instantly. Primitive humans of Earth, the alien commander said, his voice carrying casual arrogance. You have activated technologies that do not belong to you. Surrender immediately, and your species will be granted the honor of serving the Devourer Empire. Jake felt the power of the network flowing through him as he responded. This is Jake Harrison, speaking for the human species. The technologies belong to us because we built them. The defenses you're facing were placed by our ancestors to protect our homeworld. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from our solar system, or we will demonstrate why humanity has survived for over 4,000 years among the stars. The alien commander's expression shifted from arrogance to uncertainty. Impossible. The human colonies were scattered and weak. We have been destroying them systematically for decades. You destroyed the isolated ones, Jake acknowledged, but you never found the network. And now that it's active, every human world in the galaxy knows you're here. Every human ship, every human defense platform, every human colony is coordinating their response to your threat. Through the network, Jake could sense the massive mobilization taking place across human space. Fleets that had been hidden for generations were emerging from their concealment, their crews awakening to the call of their genetic heritage. The Devourers had expected to face a primitive, divided world. Instead, they found themselves confronting a civilization that had spent millennia preparing for this moment. You have 28 minutes, Jake said calmly. Choose wisely. The alien commander's face twisted with rage before the transmission cut out. Through the ship's sensors, Jake watched as the Devourer fleet began to reorganize, clearly preparing for battle rather than withdrawal. They're not going to leave, Mitchell observed. I didn't expect them to, Jake replied, but I had to give them the chance. What happens next isn't going to be pretty. The ancient defense platforms throughout the solar system began to power up to full capacity, their energy signatures creating a web of light that was visible from Earth's surface. Jake felt the network of keepers around the globe adding their authorization to the defensive systems, each one contributing to the growing power of humanity's response. This is it, Jake said, his tattoos now blazing with light that seemed to come from the stars themselves. This is the moment our ancestors planned for. The moment when scattered humanity remembers that we are one species, one people, one dream that refused to die among the stars. The Devourer fleet began its attack run, and Jake Harrison, first, keeper of the awakened network, prepared to show the galaxy that humanity had never forgotten how to fight for its home.